So once again, welcome to the Let's Get Them Home Town Hall. My name is Tawny Hammond. I am the National Director of Learning Advancement with Best Friends Animal Society. And I actually was a practitioner in animal services at two different communities in Austin, Texas, and Fairfax County, Virginia, and spent 30 years in public service. Super excited to be moderating tonight's conversation. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce our esteemed panel. Everyone is automatically muted for the presentation portion of the webinar, so you don't have to worry about accidentally unmuting yourself. If you have any questions at any point, please type that into the Q&A box on your screen. Questions submitted through the Q&A box are only visible on our end, and we'll be reviewing those and monitoring those. We may pause a few times throughout the presentation to answer questions from Q&A if they're relevant to the topic at hand. So know that we are monitoring that. We also are allowing for time at the end of the town hall to answer questions. So we are allowing for time. If you're worried about forgetting your question, why don't you go ahead and jot it down. Also put it in the Q&A box and jot it down because there will be time at the end. And keep an eye on the chat box, friends, because we will be posting resources there for you and links to different resources. Plus, there's going to be more posted to the resource section on the town hall webpage sometime tomorrow. So please stay tuned to that page. Also, a reminder that the webinar is being recorded and it will be available after the session via the website. So tonight we're going to be discussing a topic and a subject that's not necessarily new to animal services, but there's a fresh approach to the subject and a language change. Maddie's Fund in Michelson is working in collaboration with other organizations on a return to home challenge, which is pretty exciting. I do want to make a special announcement that the deadline for the No Place Like Home Challenge has been extended to January 18th. We've all been rather distracted with some of the national events, current events, maybe preoccupied, distracted, stressed out, whatever our situation might be. And so to give people intellectual and emotional space to be thinking about their submission, we've extended that to January 18th. So if you're a planner and super organized, we don't want you to be stressed out about that. But you've got a little more time to get your proposal in and your application in. I'd like to introduce our first panelist, the winner of Star Search twice. A lot of people don't know that. Gina Knepp. Nash and I was joking. Gina, she should be the winner of Star Search. Gina Knepp, National Shelter Engagement Director with Michelson Found Animals. Gina is working with Michelson Found Animals as a National Shelter Engagement Director, as I said, and her primary focus is on increasing the country's return to owner rate by engaging animal shelter organizations across the nation and finding innovative ways to locate missing pets and get them home. Gina has a really interesting background. Both Gina and I are twinning. We spent the majority of our public service career doing something other than animal services. Gina spent time as the director of a very busy high volume call center, which include 911 and 311 in the city of Sacramento. And so she has a robust background in municipal leadership and municipal service. And she went on to become the director of Front Street, the city of Sacramento's Animal Services Department. Welcome, Gina. Shelly Simmons is joining us. Shelly's the division director with Greenville South. Hey, welcome, Shelly, with Greenville County Animal Care. This was really interesting fact. When Shelly came to Greenville, South Carolina in 2007, there were 20,000 animals entering through the shelter doors each year. And more than 90% of them were prematurely losing their lives unnecessarily. By focusing on the root cause of why this was happening and coming in and building programs that keep pets out of the shelter, Greenville has reduced their intake by more than 60%. And their save rate is consistently 90% or higher. Welcome, Shelley. All right, Shyanne Shull. Shyanne, the director of Washoe County Regional Animal Services. Welcome, Shyanne. Shyanne is in Reno, Nevada, and what's really cool about Shyanne is her proactive philosophy and approach to animal welfare issues helps to drive the successful programs in Washoe that support the bond between pets and people, which is really what we're talking about this evening. With an intake average annual of 13,000 animals, Washoe County Regional Animal Services boasts, this is crazy, this number, boasts a 40% return to owner rate over a 10-year average. That's pretty amazing. That's wonderful. The success of these programs takes collaboration, dedication, community support, and a lot of hard work. So welcome to the panel. I'm super excited to be with you. Make sure you're off mute when you need to be speaking. I always forget, no matter how many times I do Zoom or do online activities. Gina, we're going to kick it off with you. We're not going to ask you to sing and dance tonight, but we are going to ask, although you might do that, we know you're very good extemporaneously. I want you to tell us more about this challenge. This is so exciting. Tell us more. How did this happen?
I think it was like hocus pocus. So there was I don't even remember which meeting I was on. It might have been one of the weekly AMPA calls, and Mary Smith from Maddie's pops up and wants to know from the shelters, what should we be granting money for? So I immediately slid in there and started saying RTO, 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 and it just exploded. And it was loud and clear that the shelter directors and managers and personnel thought, yeah, we haven't focused enough attention on this. And so Shazam, as Gomer Pyle says, we now have a challenge funded by Maddie's and Michelson. But I think it's super important to say too, that we have 8 other organizations like heavy hitters in animal welfare supporting this project. I think it's the first time we've had such a big collab, and it's the first ever grant challenge, or whatever you want to call it, that focuses on getting lost pets back home. So that's my gig. So I'm super, super excited about that.
Well, I'm excited about it too. What are the other organizations that are supporting it?
I knew you were going to say that. Petco Foundation, AWA, Heartspeak, NACA, help me here.
It's pretty robust. American Pets Alive.
HSUS, AMPA's obviously involved.
Yeah,
but there's 10 altogether.
Right, and we'll put in the chat. Oh wait, I see right there, folks. If you look at the resource chat window, all of the organizations that are supportive are on there, and all of the details on how to participate in the challenge are right on that page. It's super easy. Even I can do it. I used to joke, is it director proof? Can a manager or director do it? Because I get in there and muck it up.
Well, Tawny, we intentionally made it very easy to apply. My personal goal is that we have more applicants for this grant than ever in the history of all animal welfare granting, and we're on a trajectory to do that. And I don't know, I just couldn't be more excited about the energy behind it. And what will be really cool is 6 months from now, looking at the data and the success and the improvement. And I do believe that RTH, I call it our return to home now, is the thing that will move the needle next.
Absolutely. And there's a study in there, folks. Let's think about that too. If somebody'd like to track that, and let's gather that data for a research symposium in the fall, that would be amazing. Shyanne, I wanted to kind of turn to you about a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. First of all, this concept is really not new. In the past, we've called it return to owner, and it's been practiced rather inconsistently, depending on where you are, what community you're in. In being called return to owner, being inconsistent. And then there's a lot of organizations that believe that you can punish people into compliance by withholding their pet and making it difficult to get their pet back. Talk a little bit about your philosophy and your approach, and then also why the language change. What's the difference there? How's that going to make a difference psychologically, do you think?
Sure. Well, I think that in our industry, we're seeing a shift in general terms to make things a little bit more digestible to our layperson and our pet owners that don't necessarily cross paths with animal services on a normal basis. And so we want to make the language that we're using less lingo and more, as I said, digestible to our community, and help them understand some of the things that we're dealing with and how they can help. But my philosophy in terms of punitive versus, I like to say, proactive and educational, is the approach to responding to some of our community issues is not necessarily successfully dealt with in a punitive way. And so my philosophy is to focus on how can we be a community-based resource center to our community issues, and how can we change the perspective of our community and how they see us. So we're trying to continually shift away from being perceived as that antiquated dog catcher. And we're trying to shift the community's perception away from, they're going to take my animal, they're going to write me a ticket, they're not here to do anything positive or constructive, I must be in trouble. And so we really want to shift that. And I think that the responsibility is the animal organization in order to get that shift and the ball rolling in that direction. And so that begins with us being the resource center, offering the tools necessary for our community to be responsible pet owners. And so we offer education first. Let's talk to our community. Let's deal with whatever the issue is head on. So if you've got a repeat offender dog that keeps jumping the fence, let's go out and do a yard assessment. Let's see if we can't help them figure out how to prevent that dog from getting out. Maybe we can offer spay-neuter services. There are answers and solutions that can be offered, and punitive is not necessarily always the right answer. It's a tool in the shed, as I like to say, to utilize if necessary, if it's absolutely necessary. But I feel like we definitely have many more options before we get to that point. And really changing that perception begins with us. And the punitive approach oftentimes results in the animal being the ultimate loser in that whole mindset. And oftentimes the animal gets impounded if that's the choice that the animal control organization makes, to impound it rather than return it home. And if they make it difficult and create barriers for the animal to get returned home, then sometimes that animal pays with its life, unfortunately. So right. It really does behoove us to look into more progressive ways to keep animals at home where they belong and get them back with their owners.
Yeah, it makes total sense. It's just win-win-win. Shelley, what are your thoughts on that too? You know, return to owner, it's pretty orgy speak. It's really org speak, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think the word owner is transactional. So, you know, reuniting a pet with its owner feels like an exchange. Returning a pet to its home conjures up an image, right? It's something a lot more personal, and it's a lot more relatable to others that have pets. And so I think that it's a good choice to make, to change it to return to home. It may seem like a small change, but I think it is impactful because it is a little more relatable to the people in your community. Right.
And you bring out a really good point when you talked about it being more transactional. A lot of our language in our field is really transactional. We use acronyms and we use words that make sense to us, but it's not endearing or inviting the community in to be part of what we do. It's a really good point. You know, when we were preparing for this panel, Gina, you brought up a really interesting point. I wanted you to expound upon it. And that is, and this is not a criticism at all to any of practitioners in the field, but we focus on fast tracking, right? We want to get people, excuse me. Pets are people. We want to get pets through the system. So as soon as they become ours legally, we want to fast track them through. And our program and our program improvements, that's what we've been thinking about. Well, this is thinking about it the other way. Can you talk a little bit about that and the importance of us pausing to think about who's looking for the pet?
Sure. And you know what, Tawny, when I was at Front Street and just learning the industry, because I didn't have the experience, I just got sucked into the quagmire of hurry up, animal comes in, you have 72 hours. This is a great candidate for rescue, transfer, adoption, blah, 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 right? Because all we thought about, because, and no disrespect to the grand tours and the industry, the big, you know, industry above us, that's what we were being guided to do, because it was about life-saving, right? And I just, no mistake by anyone, but we weren't focusing on the fact that most of these animals, I would say 60% of the animals that end up in our shelters really belong to someone. There's a percentage that they may not be wanted or they may be abandoned, et cetera. But we weren't guided to focus on that. And now we've seen a shift in the industry, obviously by the 10 organizations and the funding organizations on this grant, that this is important. And so and it's okay. I mean, we walk on the shoulders of giants, but this is a kind of a new horizon for us. And so when an animal arrives at our shelter, our first thought, and that requires a big cultural shift, our first thought is, where's the family, right? And it's a flip for us, but it's not that much of a flip, right? And it certainly feels a lot better. So we're going into a different direction where the first thought should be, how do we get this animal back home where it belongs? And if we determine, we exhaust all of our efforts using all of our resources, that this animal can't go back to the home where it came from, then fine, let's resort to adoption, transfer, and rescue.
Love that. So we're looking at it both ways. We don't want them, like there's this notion, and I think we all agree, pets don't belong in shelters as much as we try, as hard as we try to make it safe and warm and enrichment and all the things we do so they stay physically and emotionally sound. It's not a sofa. It's not hanging out in front of the TV. It's not hanging out in the backyard with the family. And so getting through the system quickly to rescue to a new home. But you're right, somebody could be looking for it. So we need to be looking at it both ways, right? Before the door and through the system. Shelley, you go to conferences. One of the things that you're known for, when we were prepping for this town hall, Gina was singing your praises, and I already knew that you were pretty fabuloso. But one of the things that people say about you behind your back is that you go to conferences and you go to webinars and you attend events and you bring things back and you are not afraid to try them. Can you, we've got 184 people right now, and they might be watching together with their teams. I know we had 500 people signed up. A lot of people on this call working really hard to make a difference in their organization and with their teams. What is it about you that makes you a positive risk taker when you go and you get these ideas and materials and you come back and you do something with it?
Well, from a real basic personal level, I try hard to remember that, I can live to be 90 or I can die before 9:30. And, so I try to live my life with some sense of urgency. It's a little hard during a pandemic, but, try to live my life with some sort of sense of urgency. And, Americans spend more time at work than they do at home. And so that mindset rolls over into my career. And I really feel like we're defined by the chances that we take and the chances that we don't take. And I don't want to be known now or remembered later as someone who was not bold enough to try new things. So I think that's probably what inspires me to try something new. As far as embracing the changes of and culture of return to home, I'm a pretty big believer of that quote. Insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so if I look back at the last 10 years of return to home data for my shelter, with the exception of last year, it sucks. It's bad. And I know that is because I haven't put enough focus on programs that help get pets back home. We had some things in place and we have some awesome people here that have tried, and rates were creeping up, but I hate creeping rates. I want the wow sprint to the finish rate. So, I read actually, Gina had said something about 60% of the animals are lost and when they come into the shelter. I had read that 1 out of every 3 pets go missing in their lifetime, and that 80% of them are never found by their owners. When I read that, it was like very eye-opening for me. And that's
Yes.
the kind of data that makes it easier for people like me, leaders like me, to buy into that culture that, pets aren't just lost, and taking them out of their, communities and turning them into the shelter is not really the best way to get them home. And we have a serious problem to solve, and it starts with educating myself and then taking that back and educating the people around me and inspiring them. So that's kind of how I work.
Yeah, say that. I like that statistic you just shared about pets that are lost. Say that again.
1 out of every 3 pets go missing in their lifetime. So, you can't tell me that 1 out of every 3 pet owners is a horrible, bad, irresponsible pet owner. We all have our moments, right? And 80% of them, of those that do go missing, never are found by their owners.
Right. That's a sobering statistic. But thank you for sharing what inspires you and your mindset. I love what you shared about you could live to 90 years or you could die by not before 9:30. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I that is that you got me there. You got me on the chin with that one. That's a good one. Thank you, Shelley. Shyanne, your microchip program is pretty rad. I mean, you microchip me if I got close enough to you, and I'm being silly. Tell me about your microchip program. It's robust. People talk about it. They point to it as as a successful model. And, what benefits have you realized from the program? So tell us a little bit about the program and then the benefits, what you've realized.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny because I've talked about this topic before, and I don't really feel like we're super unique, but apparently microchipping as widely across our community as we've been doing for so many years is not necessarily the norm. But this department has been microchipping animals since 2013. There was a pilot project that was launched long before I came on board here, where the staff threw out an idea that if they microchipped everyone in Washoe County's animals that wished to have their animals microchipped over a 3-year period, they would come back to the board and ask for direction or continuance of the program. And so at that time, the goal was to microchip 5,000 animals per year for that 3-year pilot program. And the department did microchip just under, they microchipped about 14,000 animals in that first 3-year period. And so what they were able to do is articulate to the board the cost savings in just eliminating that first day of impound of over $300,000 over that 3-year period. And so the board couldn't wait to sign on to that project to continue. And so since 2013, we have microchipped approximately 30,000 animals in Washoe County. And the success of the program is entirely, it pays back in dividends in terms of the ability for us to streamline getting animals back home, to locate owners out in the field when they're picked up out in the field by our officers and get them reunited and never even impounded at the shelter. Our animal return to owner, we just did our statistics and end of year stats, and we had a 46% combined return to owner rate, which is higher than what we have historically been. So since we started the microchip program, we have had an increase of approximately 6% combined of return to owner or return to home. So 67% dogs and 10% cats. And so the number on cats, I feel like, is a particular area of celebration because, as we all know, cats are really difficult to get reunited back with their owners. Yeah. But we attribute that to the microchip program, and it's definitely a valuable resource for our community, and it's been very successful for us.
Yeah, especially talking about cats. That's amazing. 46%. You're talking about overall all the pets and a 6% bump. Shyanne, how long have you been with your organization?
I just celebrated my 6-year anniversary.
And Shelley, you've been around how many years with yours?
I've been at Greenville County Animal Care for 13 years.
So you all definitely have a long game plan. We both look for sprint victories, but it's a long game. There's really not a finish line, right? We're constantly inventing new ways of doing things. You know, speaking of inventing new ways of doing things, Gina, in prep for our town hall, we were talking about your own shelter there in where you're living in beautiful Idaho, where I'm going to come visit. I'm going to drive around on your tractor, and we're going to have fun and do Idaho things, eat some potatoes. But talk a little bit about how there's varying degrees of doing return to home. Not every community or shelter's in the same place. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean?
Well, coming from Sacramento, which is, high volume, real urban, a lot of people, I moved to a small town in Idaho, and there's one little shelter that supports the entire county. And I presume some of our volunteers might be on that call, so I'm not going to name us or anything, but I started volunteering maybe a couple months ago. I waited for a while before I dipped my toe in. And one of the first things I noticed is that they weren't publishing the stray animals on their public facing website. That there was no attempt, even though it's a very tight community, to post stray animals on any of the local Facebook pages. There's only 3, right? They didn't know what they didn't know. And, I started making some suggestions and they think I'm a rock star, and we've, ramped up the return to owner rate, and everybody gets super excited about it. And it's awesome. They're so open to entering the 21st century and learning more. But it made me think, how many rural shelters are there? And I say rural specifically, that we don't even have a connection to. There's, almost 200 people on this call. How many of them are from this little tiny town, with this little tiny shelter that they don't know what they don't know? And how do we, as the people that have been so blessed to have these connections and the training and the access to information, how do we reach out? Like there's another town not far from me, and I'm going to go there and I want to talk to, someone called themselves the Pound. And I want to introduce myself and say, please let me help you get lost animals back home. Nobody ever says no when you offer that. So, right. And I don't even know if I answered your question, but what I guess I would do is I would challenge the shelters on this call to think about their compadres that may be out in the outskirts, and what are we doing to reach out, lend a hand, share information, cross post for crime sake. But it's the little tiny things.
No, and it's good. I'm glad you're mentioning those things, because another question I had for the panel was, how do we get the smaller shelters, the smaller communities, and you just kind of described it really well, that aren't always going to the big conferences or attending webinars or being participatory in these big calls. How do we reach them? How do we help them? They may not have the budget to attend these events. And if their resources are small, and they're doing the best they can, what are your thoughts on us reaching smaller communities or less resource communities?
Are you asking me, or are you asking the panel?
Anybody that'd like to comment on it, you can kick
it off. I'll kick it off. I'm going to get in my pickup truck and drive down to the nearest, rural town next to me, introduce myself, and offer the help. I mean, the shelter that I'm affiliated with here in Idaho has no paid staff except for an office manager who works maybe 18 hours a week. Everybody else is volunteer, 100%, donation revenue, and a small contract with the local police. Even the local police don't know what they don't know. And so the first and most wonderful thing we can do is offer the information. And I steer clear from education, but just sharing. Did you know? Can we help you? It's that simple. It's starting the conversation.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, of starting conversations. And one of the things that we did, and I'm sure Shelley and Shyanne, you've done this, is in Virginia and even in Austin, Texas, we would reach out to other communities and offer assistance when we knew they were at capacity and they were struggling, if we could help, if they wanted to piggyback on adoption promotion. So it seems like with Return to Home, we could do the same thing. Would you like us to come in and talk about microchips, or talk about you know, posting on the simple things. I try not to say the fruit saying, the low hanging fruit. I like to say sprint victories. That's my thing. And but simple things that can be implemented so people can know how to find their pets, right? Because what keeps people from coming into shelters to reclaim their pets, Shyanne? What do you think are some of the barriers and challenges?
I think there's probably community-specific barriers, but particularly for my community, you know, cost is the number one challenge for a lot of people. And for my organization, we bill folks. And so if you come in to redeem your dog today and you have no money, you're going to leave with your dog. So you'll get a bill later and you can pay for it later. I also think that there is a perception of, again, going back to that punitive, I'm gonna receive a citation, I'm gonna have some type of a fine issued to me. Is my dog or cat really worth it? And also, you know, is the organizational business hours friendly for the individuals to make it there after work or before work? Are there stumbling blocks, roadblocks to locating their animal? Are there various shelters that they have to look through? Is there one regional shelter? Like in our community, it's just us. So it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. But in a lot of communities, there's 4 or 5 or more shelters. And so where to look and where to begin can be daunting to some folks. So those are just some of the variables I think that could be roadblocks.
No, good examples. What do you think, Shelley?
Well, I think everything she said, and also, you know, I think some of the larger problem is that many organizations don't perceive the animals coming into their shelter as lost at all. And really neither does the community. And that's why terms like stray and homeless are used to describe a shelter pet, and why citizens so quickly bring animals they find into the shelter or call animal control, and why, you know, shelter staff are immediately thinking of those, you know, life-saving fast tracking that you were talking about at the beginning. So I really feel like that is also an underlying problem that has to be thought through and changed, is that, yes, you know, these pets do have homes. There are underlying reasons why these pets get loose from their homes and they roam. And there's reasons why citizens call us and complain to us about a loose dog instead of calling the neighbor to let them know that their dog is loose, and why stray animals can more easily show up at the animal shelter instead of back at their home, and why so many people reclaim their pets, or so few of them reclaim their pets once they come in.
Right.
So I do think that there's that underlying problem that also has to be fixed, is really just trying to get the word out. And it starts at your own level, your own teams, is just talking about that you know, that these are not strays, these are not homeless, these are, you know, animals that belong to people, and probably those people have no idea what it is that they're supposed to do, and especially if you don't make that information readily available for them.
Yeah, if you make it hard to find them, it just exacerbates the situation. Let's talk for just briefly here. Field services is an important component to return to home. What are your thoughts on that, Shelley?
I absolutely agree. And, you know, I think probably out of all of the return to home practices that I've learned about over, you know, the last year or two, that are really outside of the box thinking, field service is probably one of the most important, and it's for me been one of the hardest. And part of that is because we have a lot of different animal control agencies that are bringing animals to our shelter, that, you know, they don't fall under my, you know, purview, to where, you know, with my staff, I can kind of push them and nudge them along, you know, but you really have to really get the buy-in of so many different agencies whenever, you know, you're working with multiple agencies. So for us, that's been the hardest challenge, but it is also one of the most important, because, you they are the face of, when people think of animal control or field services or animal protection services or whatever you call it, that, I hate to say it, but people still do conjure up that dog catcher look.
Right.
And you got to change that mentality. So if the animal control officer if people see them scanning for a microchip or looking at the tag and knocking on a door or leaving a door knocker, that really goes a long way to show that field services values the bond between animals and people and their owners, and they're actively trying to get those pets home because that's where they need to be. Not to mention the cost savings that could come with that.
Absolutely, the cost saving. Shyanne, what are your thoughts on field services?
Field services is crucial. Oftentimes that's the face of your organization, as Shelley already mentioned. And so your field staff have the opportunity to help shape the perception of your community about what it is that you're doing out there, and to hopefully transition their perception to that of a resource center and a professional organization that is there to assist them and to help them and to give them the tools to be humane, responsible pet owners. So for example, I had an officer recently that there was a dog that she was unable to catch. We'd been receiving calls for over a couple of days. The dog was missing an eye and she wasn't able to catch the dog. She had the lost information because the person had filed a lost report. She called the owner right on the spot and she stayed with the dog, and it was dark by this time. And the person responded, and when they were able to recall the dog, and the dog was reunited with its owner. But it's something as simple as that, and you sharing that story, and letting that story tell the story for your organization, or the support for your organization, and what the officers actually do out there. And then our goal is not to take your animal. Our goal is to help you keep your animal, but we need the community to help us help them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it can be a paradigm shift or a cultural shift. Gina, what are your thoughts about helping your staff and your volunteers and even the community? Some, you never know what kind of criticism you're going to get from the community, and it's usually a couple of people that maybe, pun intended, have a pet issue. But how do you make that paradigm shift and that cultural shift in your organization? Where do you start?
Well, I think cultural shift doesn't happen overnight. In my opinion, it takes 18 months for a good, solid shift. It starts with leadership. I think that the person who's steering the boat is the one who provides that direction. I just think it's time for animal welfare to drop the rock. Sometimes we're not just our ordinances and the fees we charge, et cetera, our own internal biases towards people not being good enough. And I don't mean this in a negative way toward animal welfare. It's the greatest group of the most hardworking people I've ever met, but we can't help ourselves sometimes, and letting go of the judginess just because, and I share the story about the guy who came in to redeem his dog, and he was a gangster looking guy, and he ended up redeeming like a Bichon, and he's crying and the dog's squealing. And at that moment is when I realized I need to check myself, because just because somebody's home isn't like mine, or their animal doesn't necessarily look like mine, doesn't mean they don't love that animal, that they're not caring for it. And I think that's where we need to start. That Michael Jackson song, Man in the Mirror, that's where we need to start and look at our organizations and have open conversations. Isn't it time that we helped people keep their animals with them in their homes where they belong, where they have a name, a house, a couch, their own kibble? I mean, I could blather on about it forever, but it starts with us right here.
Absolutely. Walk our talk and put our money where our mouth is. Shyanne and Shelley, before we open it up for question and answers, what do you think has been really helpful for you in getting your volunteers and your staff and community members, stakeholders, getting people on board for change, for trying new things, trying new programs? Give us your secrets. Shyanne, we'll start with you. What are some tricks of the trade? What are some tricks in your tool belt that you use, or techniques or philosophies that you're using to help kind of get people on board? And particularly, instead of saying return to owner, we're talking about return to home. Somebody could be looking for this pet. Somebody probably is. How do you do that?
Well, I think Gina's right. You definitely start from the top. You set the bar as the leader, and the expectations of what your organization aims to achieve is priority number one. And then you give your staff and volunteers the resources to get the job done. So whether that's training, whether it's microchip scanners, whatever it is, you provide that to them, and you let them take part in the wins when you do your metrics and you share those wins and those celebrations. So it could be something as simple as we were able to reunite, 5% more animals this month than we did last month. And you let the staff share in those celebrations,
right.
Recognizing that officer that spent extra time researching loss reports to get that animal reunited off the side of the road. I think those little things amount to huge things in the overall picture in changing that philosophy. And I'd really love to know Gina's secrets for 18 months in shaping that culture, because 18 months seems like a pretty short turnaround for me. It's taken quite a bit longer in my experience, but I think those are just some of the tools that I've utilized. And then the story will tell itself once those programs start to really organically take off. They will tell the story for you.
Yeah, you're right. That's cool. We want to be in the driver's seat of our stories, right? I love what you said about sharing the win. What about you, Shelley? What are some of your secrets that you can give away? What are some techniques that you're using to get buy-in and get that cultural shift?
Well, I'll echo both, as far as leadership. If your leader, if the person who's running the show and steering the ship isn't convinced about the benefits of something that needs to be changed, like return to home and those policies or those programs, it's going to be almost impossible to implement. So it always has to start with leadership. But, I think if I think about the staff, right, I think, I first, I have to acknowledge that people's opinions are formed by their experiences. And we've all had really bad experiences with pet owners. We can see the very worst in people. And when we do, we tend to forget all of the good that we see in the people. So when you're exposed to that too often, your opinion of pet owners starts to become skewed, and it's hard to separate those biases. And so then your reasoning starts to become very discriminatory. And then, you start to see this within your own staff and maybe the volunteers. You start to seek out other people who've had those similar experiences to kind of validate your concerns or validate how you feel and why you make the choices that you make. So it's not really hard to see why it's so damn difficult to trust people, but you still have to trust people. And so for me, I've gotten really good at playing devil's advocate. And, I want to explore a thought. I want people to explore thoughts other than their own, especially when it comes to their opinions, because it's really easy to overestimate our knowledge. And I think it's probably even easier to ignore information that disproves it. And so I think for staff, I try to play devil's advocate as much as possible. And then for other stakeholders, it really is, I think I'm just looking specifically at them and what is going to be meaningful for them. So for, elected officials and decision makers, that really might be showing how it's more cost effective, and maybe focus more on the human element than showing the animal feel good stuff. For law enforcement, animal control, it might be showing them how it's going to reduce complaint calls. For volunteers, it's probably going to be those all about sharing those stories, touching their hearts, inspiring them. And then for rescues and again, shelter staff, it's really more focused on convincing them the animals are going home to their owners, and it doesn't have to equate to animals are being placed in harm's way. And that should never be your first instinct. And I am not the one who coined this, and I can't remember who said this at a conference or a webinar or something, but ever since then, I say it all the time, you know, always, always, always assume good intent. And I try really hard to do that myself, and I try really hard to get staff to do the same.
No, that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing. I wanted to make sure we cover questions. This has been wonderful, delightful listening to you all. Are there any, the question here is a good one. Are there any national statistics on return to home? And if there are, where can we find them?
Tawny, I'll take this. Prior to 2020, which I think 2020 is an anomaly, and we may want to just set it aside for a minute. Prior to that, though, the average return to owner rate for dogs was 30% nationally, according to the A. Now, Shelter Animals Count, the last report I looked at said that dog return to owner rate was up to 40%, which doesn't surprise me because more people are home. All the work that we're doing, trying to get pet families to put identification on their pets, I think is making headway. There's a big debate on how to calculate cat return to owner rate. Personally, I think, like, I'll just allude to Sacramento. When I was there, we took in 5,500 cats a year, and 3,500 of them were underage kittens. Those are not lost pets, right? And you really, I think you should look at your true stray intake, exclude your ferals, for example. So in Sacramento, it was about 1,000 friendly household type cats that would come in. 10% of those, or 100 of them, were redeemed by their owners. So it depends who you ask and how you count. Hopefully in the next year or two, we'll see some consistency in how shelters are calculating their RTO rates. I think that's super important, so we all speak the same language.
I love that. Shyanne, we had some questions about the high numbers of animals that you're microchipping. Are you just doing clinics, or are you doing any pet that comes through your doors?
So prior to COVID, we were doing microchipping during business hours without an appointment. So you can just stroll in with your pet and we'll microchip it. We are also doing microchipping events that are specific to microchipping throughout our community when the weather permits. We also do free microchipping at our vaccine clinics, and we do a low-cost vaccination clinic once a month at least during the summertime, again, non-COVID year. We will go out into the community and go to parks and community areas, senior centers and things like that to hold our low-cost vaccination clinics and get the word out there. So largely in 2020, we did not microchip because we were trying to minimize the public coming through our doors. But I'm happy to say that we've been forced into moving into this century, and we're using an app now to do booking for our very first microchip clinic on the 26th of this month, so by appointment. So we are going to resume those microchipping services.
That's awesome. And that's one of the questions I didn't get to about how technology might fit in with improving our return to home efforts and programs. So you just offered that up. Thank you. And if you don't mind, if you have an app that you're using, if you don't mind sharing that, we would appreciate it.
Sure, we're using Acuity.
Okay. Thank you. What are your all's thoughts on requiring a city or county license for all pets in the community? Do you think that's going to help improve return to home? I know there's pros and cons on that. We probably could talk for an hour just on the pros and cons of mandatory licensing.
You know, I'll start off on that. And oops, am I muted? No. Was it San Antonio that eliminated licensing and went to mandatory microchipping kind of in lieu of a license? And it was a one and done. I'm very excited about that program. They're seeing really good results with it. Because if you think about how much money your agency is spending attempting to collect that license revenue, in the long run, it may not be worth it.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a topic that merits further exploration. There's got to be a better way. I do think the microchip for now, and I don't sell microchips, so don't quote me there. But I do think we need to find something other than a license that's appealing to people. Remember, we used to license our bicycles. Maybe some cities still do that.
Yeah, we still do in my county here in Michigan.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
You know,
not, it's
something
not licenses, but it's a number.
Right, it's the number. It's like a
Sticker.
tag for your bike, right? You know, when Shyanne was talking about chipping everything with 4 legs in her community, I think it's important for our viewers to understand that microchipping is wonderful, but registering that chip at the time of implant on behalf of that pet family, the cities and counties that do that have the highest return to owner rates in the country.
Yep.
So don't chip and expect somebody to do the initial registration.
Right.
Help them. People need help, and so that's what we're here for.
Oh, that's such a good point. It's such an important point. I'm so glad you said that. We would have been remiss not to include that in the town hall. What do you all think? Let's see, we've got a question here about how to address finder-assisted reunification versus return to the field for cats found outside. So can you talk about how to address finder-assisted reunification versus return to field for cats found outside?
Finder assisted. So you mean, hopefully I'm understanding this correctly, how to help someone who finds an animal that wishes to, a cat who wishes the same way you would with a dog. I mean, there's very little difference. I mean, granted, the species are very different, but you can put that cat in a carrier and walk around the neighborhood. You can knock on doors. You can post, you know, register that animal in Finding Rover. Actually, it works better for cats than it does dogs. You can, you know, post an ad on Craigslist. You can file a found animal report. I mean, all of those things are relatively synonymous. I wouldn't recommend putting a leash on the cat and walking around the neighborhood, though.
We had a question about how do you work with humane societies? So if you're a municipal shelter or a nonprofit that holds a contract and you're dealing with other organizations that have a focus on seizing and impounding and taking pets away and not reunifying them. So if you're working with other partners in your community, how do you get buy-in? In other words, this could be a very lengthy answer, but briefly, any tips, any pro tips for people that are working or leaders and people on this call that are working with other organizations that might not share their mindset?
Tawny, I'd be happy to do an offline response to this because my response would be quite lengthy, but Regional Animal Services and the Nevada Humane Society share a co-located campus. And we are essentially married by a 30-year bond that taxpayers voted on back in 2002. And so we have a dynamic relationship that not every community can say they have, and where the nonprofit and the governmental organizations share a lot of commonalities, but also a lot of differences. But I'd be happy to talk to anyone who wanted to talk more in depth about how we align and how we come together to unite for the best benefit of our community.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you, Shyanne, for being so generous. And folks, remember, in the chat window, we have been posting resources for the past 57 minutes. So be sure before you log off that you scroll through that, maybe bookmark, share, copy some that are important to you. So I'm so glad you talked about getting in the database, educating owners when they're adopted or helping them do it. Let's see, we're getting down to our time. We have about 3 minutes.
Comment. Do you mind if I
Sure.
comment on something? You know, there was a question about the licensing, and I'm not going to answer to licensing specifically versus microchipping, but it did make me think about the impound fees and the boarding fees and things like that shelters often charge for people to get their animals back. And, you know, I think it was about 4 years ago, we reduced our return to home fees to $35 and started to really see people come and get their animals more quickly and come and get their animals. And this last year, we went completely fee-free. And so, you know, I know that, you know, that's maybe something that people, organizations are reluctant to try. But, you know, the amount of revenue that we lost because we stopped charging those fees is like 0.5% of our total budget. But we saw a lot length of stay. for animals that ultimately got returned home go down by 2 days. And that just, if you just look at that one little piece of it, that's a $60,000 savings for us. And that doesn't count all of the other return to home strategies that were implemented. So, you know, I think we've got to look at things like that, microchipping versus, you know, pet licensing and the cost of licensing, and the barriers, you know, the barriers of fees, especially now more than ever. It shouldn't be the mindset that people have if they can't afford the $35, $85, $105 to get their pet back, they shouldn't have it. Because I would challenge that probably many of us on this call couldn't come up with, you know, $105 right now if we had to, especially if it was close to payday, but not quite. So I think we have to think about those things.
Oh, it's a really good point. Gina.
You know, Tawny, just on, you know, following up with what Shelley just said, yesterday I read that 39% of Americans cannot come up with $1,000 if they needed it right now. And so who are we, right, to hold animals captive? And Shelley, you're so spot on. It costs more money to try and collect those fees, keep that animal, vet them, and get them ready for adoption. And sadly, sometimes we end up killing someone's pet because they're not suitable for adoption, but they would have been great going back home.
Yeah, it's absolutely spot on what everybody's saying. And I'm really glad that you shared what you shared at the end. And I know that there's so many fabulous questions we couldn't get to. Things like, what do you do when people think microchipping is bad and they're afraid of it? And how do you convince them that it's not a bad thing and that it could help you get their pet home? And how do you, you know, so somebody in Missouri that wanted to know, they're dealing with 22 municipalities, 12,000 animals a year, a huge area, you know, where to start with that. Some of our questions are fabulous, and all of them were really great questions that could be another half-hour conversation. We're at the end of our time, and I just wanted to thank, you know, Shelley and Shyanne and Gina for being a part of the Best Friends Town Hall. Let's get them home. They belong in our homes, not in our shelters. It's hard, as much as we try to make it feel like home and a safe space for them, being in a home, returning them to home, it's an important priority for us. So I want to thank you for your time and thank our friends for tuning in and joining us tonight for the town hall and for being here. We've got a lot going on in our nation. Let's all be kind to each other and take care of each other. The best is yet to be. Thank you, everybody. Good evening. Namaste. Thank you.